My wife won a $9 million jackpot, filed for divorce, and kicked me out, but she forgot about the prenup. I'm a 35-year-old man from a modest background. My parents live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and I grew up in a small 3-bedroom house that always smelled like fresh laundry and home-cooked meals. After high school, I worked a variety of odd jobs, bartending, helping at my uncle's hardware store, and eventually managing a local sporting goods shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. My wife, on the other hand, came from a world I had never experienced. Her family owned multiple properties, drove luxury cars, and hosted extravagant parties a few times a year. Let's call my father-in-law Phil and my mother-in-law Mil. Phil was a tall, commanding man who exuded quiet authority in any room. His casual remarks often carried an undertone of subtle threats or manipulation. Mil had a similar presence. Just one raised eyebrow was enough to make people feel small. They were never openly cruel, but I could sense their disapproval hidden beneath polite conversations. When my wife and I got engaged, I realized just how much her parents feared outsiders gaining access to their family's wealth. They saw me as an intruder, despite the fact that my wife and I had been together for years. Before we could even set a wedding date, Phil insisted that I sign a prenuptial agreement. I didn't have the resources to challenge it legally, and I was too blinded by love to object. I convinced myself that it was just a formality to put her parents at ease. Love was the only assurance I needed, right? The day I signed the prenup is still vivid in my memory. It was a warm afternoon at her parents' massive home. Phil placed the document in front of me and slid a pen my way. Mil casually offered me coffee, treating the whole situation like a business transaction. My wife stood off to the side, saying little. That hurt, but I shrugged it off, believing it wouldn't matter in the long run. The contract stated that any gifts, inheritances, or trust funds from her family would remain her separate property. However, any significant assets we acquired together, such as a house or lottery winnings, would be considered marital property. I found that detail a bit strange, but I was too eager to marry her to question it. 6 months later, we had a beautiful wedding by a serene lake. My parents were overwhelmed by the extravagance, but remained supportive. I still remember the tension on my father's face when he greeted my in-laws. He had always advised me to trust my instincts, but I believed love would conquer all doubts. The first few years of our marriage were relatively smooth. We lived in a condo that her parents had helped us secure. Although the down payment came from her father, I contributed monthly to the mortgage. In hindsight, that gift wasn't really a gift, it was just another way for them to maintain control over us. But at the time, I assumed this was simply how wealthy families operated. Our marriage had the usual disagreements about money and occasional arguments over our parents interfering in our decisions. Her parents would show up unannounced, bring in new furniture or decorations, and sometimes even rearrange our entire living space without consulting us. Whenever I expressed frustration, my wife brushed it off as just their way of being helpful. Then came the moment that turned my entire world upside down. One day, my wife called me, breathless with excitement. She had won a $9 million lottery jackpot from a random ticket she bought at a gas station. At first, I was thrilled, imagining a future where we could quit our jobs and travel the world together. But my excitement quickly faded. She insisted we keep it a secret, even from my parents. She became oddly paranoid, talking about handling the money properly and setting up meetings with lawyers I had never met. When I asked to be involved, she dismissed me, saying, "You'd feel out of place." That stung. But I had no idea the real shock was yet to come. One afternoon, I came home from work exhausted, only to find my wife and her aunt rummaging through our drawers. She dropped the news casually. She was filing for divorce. She told me to pack my bags and leave the condo, claiming it was in her name. I was stunned. I had been contributing to the mortgage every month, yet she acted as if her father's down payment and her newfound fortune made me irrelevant. I felt my heart sink. With my voice shaking, I called my father and told him I had just been kicked out of my own home. It was the ultimate betrayal. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. I discovered that my father-in-law had sent his personal attorney to protect my wife. They wanted me out so they could keep the lottery winnings for themselves. However, they had forgotten the very terms of the prenup they had forced on me. Instead of shielding their daughter completely, the document clearly stated that any financial windfall acquired during the marriage was considered a joint asset. That realization changed everything. If they insisted on divorcing me right after the jackpot, they might not get to keep all of it. I knew I had to handle things carefully. My father advised me to stay calm, find a lawyer outside their social circle, and prepare for a difficult legal battle. I was determined not to back down. They had treated me like a disposable nuisance, assuming I would quietly walk away. But they had severely underestimated me. For a few days, I stayed at my parents' house, trying to process everything. My mother was furious, ranting about how my in-laws had been disrespectful from the start. My father, though just as angry, remained practical. He contacted an old friend, a family law attorney, and arranged a meeting for me first thing in the morning. Sitting in the attorney's office, I felt a mix of anger and relief. I explained how my in-laws had forced the prenup on me, how my wife had just won $9 million, and how she had blindsided me with a divorce. After reviewing the prenup, my lawyer actually chuckled. "They shot themselves in the foot," he said. They specifically included language that classifies lottery winnings as marital assets. Unless a judge makes a bizarre interpretation, you're entitled to a significant portion. Hearing that was like grasping a lifeline. I had been so worried that the prenup would exclude me, but their fear of me accessing inherited wealth had blinded them to this possibility. My lawyer warned me that the fight wouldn't be easy. My in-laws were wealthy, well-connected, and would likely bring in an aggressive legal team. However, he believed we had a solid case, especially since I had contributed financially to the marriage and had been abruptly kicked out of our shared home. I asked about the divorce process in our state. A contested divorce could take months, even years. However, if my wife's side realized they had a weak case, they might push for a quick settlement. My lawyer predicted they would try to intimidate me or use shady tactics to get me to settle for much less than I deserved. Sure enough, within days, my father-in-law left me a threatening voicemail, telling me to back off because I didn't deserve anything from his daughter. He warned that if I pursued the lottery winnings, he would make sure I got nothing. My lawyer advised me to document everything. Then, my mother-in-law approached me outside my parents' house, offering me a pity settlement if I would just disappear quietly. She presented it as a generous deal, but the amount was laughably low. It wouldn't even cover half of what I had paid toward our mortgage. I refused, telling her we would settle it in court. She scoffed, clearly unaccustomed to anyone rejecting her money. With negotiations going nowhere, my lawyer filed motions to prevent the lottery funds from being hidden or transferred. This enraged my in-laws, who then spread rumors that I was a gold digger who had preyed on their innocent daughter. Their lies stung, but I remained firm. My boss, the owner of the sporting goods shop where I worked, stood by me. He ignored my father-in-law's attempts to interfere with my job. Friends took sides. Some thought I was being petty, while others applauded me for standing up for myself. The tension was overwhelming, but I refused to cave. After weeks of fruitless negotiations, we finally got a court date. My wife was nowhere to be found. She had completely withdrawn under her parents' protection, refusing to speak to me directly. Instead, her lawyers handled everything, claiming that I had contributed nothing to the marriage. My lawyer fought back with financial records, proof of shared expenses, and the explicit clause in the prenup about windfalls. We also highlighted how I had been forcibly shut out of our home. The judge ordered both sides to prepare for a formal hearing on asset division. In a final act of intimidation, my father-in-law once again tried to threaten my boss, who told him to get lost. That only made him angrier. My lawyer cautioned me to proceed carefully, but remained confident that a judge would see through their scare tactics. Nothing could have truly prepared me for the final showdown in court. But at least I knew that, ironically, the very prenup they had forced on me was now working in my favor. Weeks passed, and the tension around the upcoming hearing kept building. My wife still refused to talk to me, but her lawyers bombarded mine with motions. They argued that the lottery win was separate property since she had purchased the ticket. They completely ignored the prenup's clear language stating that any major financial windfall during the marriage was considered marital property. Meanwhile, my father-in-law tried to destroy my reputation among friends and business associates, pushing the narrative that I was a gold digger who had only married into their family for money. Despite all of this, I stood my ground, determined to fight for what was rightfully mine. I felt a mix of frustration and determination. If they thought they could bully me out of my rights, they were mistaken. I had documents proving my financial contributions to our shared life, utility bills, groceries, and partial mortgage payments. My attorney and I carefully reviewed every detail of the prenup, and he pointed out a crucial sentence. All financial windfalls, including but not limited to lottery or game show winnings, shall be considered marital assets unless expressly designated otherwise. It was as if my in-laws had unknowingly left a back door wide open. A week before the hearing, we had a preliminary status conference. My wife arrived with her parents and a small army of lawyers, 4 attorneys, and a financial advisor. They looked at me with their usual air of superiority, but their expressions faltered when my lawyer calmly presented the prenup, highlighting the clause about lottery winnings. The judge listened in silence, unimpressed by their attempts to dismiss it, and ordered that all substantial assets remain frozen until the main hearing. That afternoon, my mother-in-law cornered me outside the courthouse, pretending we should talk like adults. She offered me a lump sum, an even lower amount than before, calling it a generous offer for someone in my background. I refused again, telling her we'd let the judge decide. She snapped, accusing me of destroying the family, as if I was the one who blindsided her daughter with a divorce. The hypocrisy made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. My lawyer had warned me not to engage in emotional exchanges that could be twisted against me later. Behind the scenes, I was worried my in-laws might try to hide the lottery winnings in secret accounts. My lawyer anticipated this and requested court orders to prevent large transfers. We also had a forensic accountant on standby in case they attempted to conceal funds. My father-in-law, growing angrier, left me a voicemail calling me vile and accusing me of draining the love from his daughter's life. The irony was staggering, considering they were the ones who threw me outright after hitting the jackpot. As the hearing approached, I meticulously prepared with my attorney. We rehearsed my statement, ensuring I would appear calm and factual in court. I had copies of the prenup, receipts for the mortgage payments I had contributed to, and even text messages from my wife acknowledging our shared bills. My lawyer advised me to keep my answers concise and let the evidence speak for itself. If they resorted to emotional theatrics, we would counter with clear documentation. On the morning of the hearing, my heart pounded as I stood outside the courthouse. My parents accompanied me for moral support, though they waited outside the courtroom. Stepping inside, I saw my wife seated beside her father, both wearing stone-cold expressions. Her mother lingered at the back, arms folded. My father-in-law's lawyers, polished and confident, looked as if they believed money and legal muscle would overpower the facts. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, wasted no time. She invited each side to present their arguments. My wife's lead attorney tried to paint me as a minor contributor, claiming I had done little more than occupy the same living space. They argued that the lottery ticket was her personal purchase, made with her money. But my lawyer calmly pointed out the prenup's explicit language, which classified such windfalls as marital property. Then, he presented bank records showing that my wife had used our joint account card to buy the ticket. A visible wave of tension rippled through my father-in-law's legal team. The judge asked if they had any proof that the funds were exclusively hers. They fumbled, claiming the card was used by accident or that the money came from her father's deposit. But the bank statements clearly listed both our names, not hers alone. The judge took note, her gaze shifting expectantly to their side. Finally, my wife spoke. She claimed she never wanted to hurt me, that her parents pressured her into the divorce after the jackpot to protect family assets. She stumbled over her words, admitting she felt pushed into it, but also justifying it by saying everyone would come after us if they knew about the money. My lawyer asked if she had consulted me before making these decisions. She admitted no. The judge's disapproval was palpable. By midday, it was clear that the prenup was a double-edged sword for them. The very document they had forced upon me to protect their wealth now threatened to place a massive portion of the lottery winnings in my hands. The judge scheduled a final hearing for a ruling, stating she was inclined to treat the winnings as marital assets subject to equitable distribution. Outside the courthouse, my father-in-law walked past me, muttering, "This isn't over." But his confidence was visibly shaken. In the weeks leading up to the final ruling, their desperation escalated. His lawyers tried everything, filing motions to reinterpret the prenup's wording, arguing that the intent was never to include lottery winnings. The judge denied their motions, pointing to the plain language of the agreement. My mother-in-law cornered me again, this time with a warning: I'd regret it if I broke their family. I looked her in the eye and told her point-blank that they were the ones who started this by kicking me out and blindsiding me with divorce. Not long after, my wife reached out, leaving an emotional voicemail. She said she didn't want things to end so bitterly, and that if we could come to a private arrangement, maybe we could salvage something of our relationship. Maybe, under different circumstances, I would have considered it. But after the intimidation, the lies, and the forced eviction, my trust was shattered. My lawyer advised me not to engage in these backdoor discussions. We had a strong legal position, there was no reason to settle for crumbs. The day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed with attorneys from both sides. My parents and a few friends came to support me, seated quietly in the back. The judge took the bench, reviewed the updated filings, and allowed final statements. My father-in-law's lead attorney made one last desperate attempt to paint me as a cunning opportunist who had only discovered the prenup's loophole after benefiting from their family's generosity. My lawyer calmly countered with the facts. They forced me to sign the prenup. The prenup explicitly stated that lottery winnings or any financial windfall counted as marital property. My father-in-law may have financed part of the condo, but I contributed monthly, so it wasn't solely a separate asset. The immediate divorce filing right after the jackpot was clear evidence of their plan to isolate me from the winnings. The judge listened patiently, then delivered her ruling. She declared that the lottery winnings clearly fell under marital assets based on the prenup's language. She criticized my in-laws for trying to twist the very agreement they had drafted. Additionally, she ruled that my wife's sudden eviction of me from our home was unreasonable and that I was entitled to reimbursement for my portion of the mortgage and other marital contributions. In short, I won. The judge's order granted me a substantial percentage of the lottery payout, plus reimbursement for my share in the condo. A finalization date was set a few weeks later to process the paperwork. As we left the courtroom, my father-in-law's face was thunderous. My mother-in-law whispered furiously to him, outraged. My wife stood there, tears in her eyes, maybe from regret, or maybe from anger over losing so much money. I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Once, we had loved each other, but greed, parental influence, and their attempts to exploit me had shattered everything. In the weeks that followed, their lawyers tried to negotiate a slightly modified settlement, likely hoping I'd accept a smaller sum to avoid further drama. But my lawyer advised against it. There was no reason to compromise. The only concession I made was giving up any interest in the condo. I had no desire to set foot in that place ever again. Then, they cut me a check. Was it half the jackpot? Not exactly. But it was a huge sum, enough to let me rebuild my life comfortably. Looking back, I realized that my in-laws truly believed their wealth made them untouchable. They never expected me to fight back effectively. But in the end, the very prenup they forced on me became the weapon that ensured I wasn't left penniless. Poetic justice, if ever there was. As for my wife, from what I've heard, she remains under her parents' control. She's lost face in her social circle because of the fiasco. Some mutual acquaintances say she struggles with guilt, but I doubt she'll ever openly admit how much of this was orchestrated by her family. I used part of my settlement to help my parents upgrade their home, my way of thanking them for standing by me. Another portion I invested for my future. The entire ordeal left scars. It changed how I view trust, marriage, and money. But I take comfort in knowing I stood my ground. I refused to be bullied into accepting scraps. It was painful, exhausting. But in the end, it was a victory. Now I'm free. Free from my in-laws' manipulative grasp. Free to move forward. Ironically, my life now feels like it did before my marriage, simpler, but stronger. I'm wiser. No longer the naive man they thought they could steamroll. If they remember anything about me, let it be this. They started the war. I finished it. And that's the end of this chapter.